Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Monday, May 17th. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornital, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker once again, doing things a little differently this week. We're going to be breaking up the early week show into a few different parts. Very happy, though, to get it kicked off with a man who we've been very pleased to have as a regular contributor on these airwaves for the past couple of years. Also incredibly gratified by the fact that he's a listener. He is professional horse player Mike Maloney. Mike, how are things in Lexington, Kentucky?
Everything's beautiful, Pete. Great weather, and we're just living the good life here.
I'm glad to hear it. Very, very glad to hear it. I mentioned we're doing things a little differently this week. One of the guests, maybe the only guest, I haven't fully figured out what tomorrow's show is going to be. But one of the things I know I want to do is have Pat Cummings back on the air from the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation. He came on at the beginning of this Wagering Integrity series to preview it. Tomorrow's the last piece where they're going to drop their recommendations. I know, Mike, you as a horse player have been in touch with a lot of the issues regarding wager insecurity for, going on back, I think, about 2 decades now, or close to it. I was curious if you've had a chance to read any of the stuff in these papers from the TIF to this point.
I've read it all, everything that's been released, Pete, and I think it's excellent. I think it's the much needed look into the realities of where we are regarding wagering security in racing, and total kudos to the Thoroughbred Ideal Foundation and to Pat Cummings in particular. I know I have a good idea of the amount of time and work that Pat put into this, and I just think he did a tremendous job, and it's much needed in racing.
What's one thing that you learned or that stood out to you in reading through the findings in this? It's an 8-part series. It's all available over at racingideas.com. Folks should definitely check it out. But what's one thing that stands out to you?
Well, there were a lot of things that were interesting, and I think horse players, I can't recommend it highly enough. I think every horse player should take the time to go through this series just to educate yourself on what the status of security is in the wagering in racing today, and to maybe have better insights into the problems. But the thing that hit me the most, there were several things that I learned in the report, but the thing that hit me the most was just how inadequate our system is compared to other countries. And, they have their issues too, but it seems like that we're pulling up the rear in wagering security across the world.
It's not unlike some other areas of the industry as well. Let me correct one thing, though. Racing Ideas, that's the Twitter handle. RacingThinkTank.com. That's the URL for people that want to check that out. And then, of course, you can follow Pat as well. But I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of the testing and the big story of last week that, of course, we'll get into. Wasn't planning on leading with it, but it's a good segue. It amazes me that in an industry that's, a multi-billion-dollar industry, that, for example, we can't get the split test back on the Derby winner until after the Preakness is run. These doesn't feel like best practices on the medication side or on the wagering security side for a business where there's so much money, and you'd think there'd be a vested interest in being able to look like a serious sport across all areas. Is that a fair comparison, that it's not just in terms of wagering security where the industry needs to kind of take a look in the mirror and say, we can do better than this?
Well, I think that's exactly right, Pete. There's, almost any area you look at, there are, easy improvements to be made if the industry is willing to spend a few bucks to bring us, up to even a moderate standard. I think the only area, someone asked me the other day, well, what's right with racing? And because you seem to point out a lot of things that are wrong with racing. And, the first thing that came to my mind was the ease with which we can bet our money. These wagering platforms are outstanding. They're excellent. They're state of the art. I can bet on a race in Hong Kong in a millisecond, but that's because that brings in revenue for the industry. And unfortunately, the things that don't bring in immediate revenue, the things that are that need to be done because they are the right thing to do and because they secure our game, give us a future long term. Those things, if they're not helping the next quarter's bottom line, they're just not done in racing, and that's the fact.
That makes me think about how you've been fighting a lot of these fights for however long it's been when you got involved on the horseplayer advocacy side. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to say 2 decades. And when you started off trying to push some of these initiatives and the idea of racing getting totally into the 21st century, that was a wagering landscape where there was no sports betting. Sports betting wasn't even a dream really at that point in the USA. How does the advent of sports betting change this conversation, Mike, from the way you felt about it when you got involved on the advocacy side to the realities we're facing today?
It just creates a lot more competition, Pete. And it creates, it's not now that we're competing with the lottery, with state lotteries. It's now we're competing with a much tougher competitor. We're competing with the very best gaming companies in the world who have a much better idea of who their customer is and how to give that customer what they want than racing does, unfortunately. It's, I don't want to go too far off in the woods here, but when I entered racing, takeout was, 15, 18%. And during my time in racing, competition has expanded many, many times. There's much more competition now than when I entered racing. And our response to that has been to raise takeout. Our response to integrity issues, we had the Better Breeders' Cup betting scandal in 2004.
I think was it 2000? I wanted to say, it wasn't 2001. Yeah, maybe it was 2004, right around then.
The early 2000s, let's say. That's the good thing about racing is they're so slow to react. It still sounds good even if we say it's 2010. But,
2002
was in the middle, split the difference. When Bull Pony stormed down the stretch and made the Drexel boys rich for a few minutes, you would think that if anything in racing would wake the execs up and realize that, hey, we have to get this straightened out. We have to take integrity of the wagering pools and integrity of racing in general seriously and put some money into it and get this straightened out. You would think that the theft of racing's biggest pool on racing's biggest day would do that, but it did not, unfortunately. And back to Pat Cummins' report on wagering security or insecurity, he details all the things that went on behind the scenes coming out of that Breeders' Cup scandal, and the money that was spent, the plans that were made, the funds that were set aside to address some of those issues, but it never happened. And he goes through in detail the reasons why it didn't happen, the individuals and the organizations that let the players down, and unfortunately are still letting the players down today.
I'm very excited for this last installment because it is the one that's more looking forward and getting into recommendations. And we'll talk to Pat about that tomorrow. But I do also just want to make the point. I think there's certain people, even, sharp players, people who believe in horseplayer advocacy, but they hear you, they hear me, they hear Pat, they're talking about this, and they question a little bit where we're coming from sometimes. Maybe it was even present in that question your friend associate asked you about, well, what does racing do right? I just want to make the point, because you're the best example of this, of all of us, I think, Mike, is that we're actually coming at this not because we want to complain and be Debbie Downer all the time, but because we come at it for a place of love, and we want to see racing succeed, and we believe that it's the best gambling game, and we believe that despite all the missteps, etc., that there still is hope and still a path to our proving to the world that we are capable of being the best gambling game. I just wanted you to expound on that idea for a minute, just so people don't think that we're just here trying to rain on a parade all the time.
Yeah, and that's it hurts me to have to continually go here, but to continually point out racing shortcomings. But I love racing. There's nothing in the world that I no activity that I love more than racing. And my dad was a horse player all his life. My son loves to play the horses. Most of my good friends are horse players. So it means a lot to me. It's not something that when I say something bad about racing, I don't say it lightly. I don't want to say it. I have to say it because racing has done a horrendous job, in all honesty, of protecting our customers, of improving our product, and of moving forward in today's world. The potential customers, old dogs like me, are probably going to stay with racing, and we're going to grind it out until they bury us in the infield. But racing can't exist on guys of my generation. Racing can't even exist for long on guys of your generation, even though I've heard you're a boomer. I'm not sure. But, there's different reports on that. But for racing to thrive in the future and going forward, racing has to compete for the younger generations. And to do that, you have to compete with sports betting. You have to compete with you're going to have to compete with online casino gaming. You're going to have to compete with a lot of very sharp competitors and very sharp corporations that know gaming and know how to market it, know how to price it. We haven't proven that we can do that in racing. We've proven just the opposite. We've proven that in 2007, if you base 2007 handle, our handle last year was 25% down from that. And in those, 13 years, gambling in the U.S. has boomed. It's exploded. So how are we down 25%? It's because we're doing things wrong. It's because we're not providing the level of integrity in our game that your customer requires. It's because we're mispricing our product. It's because we're not marketing our product properly. So to answer your question, going forward, we have to market our game to a younger generation that has grown up on instantaneous wagering and well-marketed, well-priced wagering. They're used to paying 5% roughly for a wager. They're used to having that a level of security that that is reasonable to most people. One thing that younger people that I applaud them for, if they're not treated properly by a retailer or anyone that they're consuming a product from, they leave, they move on. And I think the same thing will happen to racing. It won't matter how much money we spend marketing. It won't matter, what else we do. If we don't have a level of integrity and that's for medications, that's for welfare of the horse, that's for wagering security, that's for the complete product that we offer, if we don't offer that with a proper level of integrity, they will not participate, and racing will fall even further from where we are now.
I was not planning on spending 15 minutes talking about this to start the show, but I'm glad we did, because not only is it always just good to hear from you on these important issues, but I truly believe, and you tell me if I'm pumping too much blue sky into the picture here, Mike, but I do feel like this is a time when we're at a crossroads, and the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act, while there's, I have more questions about it than it's provided answers at this point for sure, it does seem like hopefully an opportunity to get this stuff addressed in a more coherent way than ever before. Before we pivot and talk about the Preakness, which was our stated topic, the one I told Craig to put the graphic up on the screen. I should have had him do too. Oh well, post fail. I just want to know if you think I'm being naive about that, or if you really do believe this is an opportunity to close this portion of the conversation on at least a little bit of an optimistic note.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Pete. I think we're at a crossroads. I think a lot of the wagering dollars in the U.S. are thrown up in the air right now. And, all the competitors have baskets, and they're going to try to catch as many dollars as they can. And if we're going to catch some of those dollars, we're going to have to do some of the things that you and I have discussed today, even if they cost money. You sometimes it's a capital investment when you raise the level of your product, when you increase the level of integrity in your product to where you attract new customers. That's basic business 101. You have to spend money sometimes in order to make money. And we are definitely to the point where we have refused to spend for 20 or 30 years, ever since the advent of simulcasting. And now it's reached a crisis point, and it's either now or never.
It's very well put. And I will just, to make one more point to the people who think that, you or me or Pat are too negative about racing. I'd argue that your points and our vision for how the industry should spend its money almost proves the other point. We believe in racing so much. We know that this investment can yield dividends. And it's not like you see businesses do this all the time, where they just sort of decide to stop putting money into things, let things run on their own, harvest the existing customers, and just keep it going as long as they have. And that's the opposite of the attitude that we have about horse racing. We think we really deserve a star place in the sports betting cosmos, and we want to see it happen. All right, we'll pivot away from this conversation. We're going to return to it tomorrow with Pat himself. Again, we'll have some new information then and take it in a new direction with his recommendations. And obviously, Mike would love to hear offline what you think about what they come up with in there, and maybe we'll have a future conversation about that. But let's turn our attention to the 2021 Preakness. For me, this was a result. I don't know if racing needed it to go down this way in the Preakness, but for me personally, it was a really nice, life-affirming result to have Rombauer, this very cool horse, be able to win the day. The partnership between the owner and trainer, Mike McCarthy, they both deserve a lot of credit by all the accounts I've heard. We're talking about, good folks on the ownership, and McCarthy's a friend. So I know he's a good dude. Just so wonderful to see these fresh connections and this cool horse succeed on one of racing's biggest stages. Let's start with the betting side of things. How did you bet this Preakness, and were you able to make any money out of it?
And I was able to lose everything I bet, Pete. So I don't know if that's any good or not.
Not a life-affirming result for you, then.
Well, there's no use candy coating it, right? If you're going to be in this business, the first thing you have to do is be honest with yourself. So might as well be honest with you guys too. I had first of all, I don't know the owner breeder, and I don't know Michael McCarthy either, but I admire his training, and I've heard he's a great guy, and I'm happy for him. This was his first step, his first Triple Crown win, and I'm happy for him. I'm especially happy for those owners, owner breeder. I think they have two mares. It was really really cool to see how kind of shocked the guy was that he had won the race. He seemed genuinely surprised and kind of in a daze, kind of amazed that it actually had happened. So you couldn't help but feel good for him. And I want to give you a little love here, because in a previous conversation on air, you were a proponent of Rombauer. I didn't like him then. I haven't liked him since, and I didn't like him Saturday. But he proved me wrong. I've spent an hour going back, as handicappers tend to do. Go back and what did I miss? Why didn't I see that horse? And I still can't find him. But with the way I look at him, he's a horse that had a lifetime high of an 88 buyer, and he'd never won a race on dirt. So I couldn't go there, but he won the race. He ran well. I still think this is a weaker than normal crop of 3-year-olds. I think anytime you're dealing with that situation, you can get, you tend to get a little bit of the unusual result, in my opinion. So that's kind of the slant that I put on it. I will say that this will be familiar to horse players. If you take Rombauer out of the equation, which is kind of silly to do, maybe, I had the race lined up perfectly. Well, below him, there's all my kill bets just lined up in order. So when that happens, I kind of give myself a pass, and I still feel like, I had a lot of decent opinions in the race. I was totally against Concert Tour. And I had the other contenders lined up properly. I had Keep Me in Mind as the horse to slip in on the bottom again. But I was totally wrong about Rombauer. He won the race, so you tear your tickets up. But as a horse player, that when that situation happens, I don't feel too bad about losing my money. But because I played the race the way I saw it, and I was just wrong.
Rombauer now has as strong of a figure as nearly anybody in the crop. I think it was a 102 buyer, and time form came out pretty similar to that. Presumably he's going to come back in 5 weeks or 3 weeks time, 5 weeks from the Derby, and take on Essential Quality and maybe Malathot and the rest. Do you think now that he's shown it on the track, he'll have won you over a little bit in terms of how you're going to rate him, or are you still skeptical and or thinking maybe just from a horse playing point of view, the result might have been a little bit of a fluke?
I don't know, Pete. I'm gonna, he moved way forward, in my opinion. I like to rely on what I call ability figures, and my ability figure on him was on Rombauer was a mid-80s, and he moved that ability figure to around 100. That's a big jump. 3-year-olds can make big jumps. They can change quickly, but I wouldn't expect another move forward, off that. I would expect some consolidation there, maybe pair that number up. So I'm expecting Excessive Quality to I always struggle with that horse's name.
Essential Quality, close enough.
Elusive Quality. I'm expecting him to walk his beat in the Belmont. I still think he's the best of the crop.
You feel like he was best in the Derby, as I'm on record saying?
I agree with that. A lot of sharp handicappers disagree with that, but I think Excessive Quality had a sneaky tough trip in the Derby, and people I really respect have have said bluntly that they don't think that. But it's so
he
just
didn't break. He moved wide. I mean,
yeah,
and he was against the flow. I really felt. I mean, it was one of those weird things where we were sitting in the press seats too. You know how you could see the momentum when you're watching a live race differently than when you're on a screen. I mean, I declared him the winner when he was making his move. So I guess in that sense, I have a little bit of sympathy for the cynical view, which would be that he hung a little bit. But I think when I go back and I watch the trip and see everything he'd overcome to get to that point, I don't think he hung. I just think it wasn't his day. And I'm very excited to see what he has to do. And I, too, would probably rank him ahead of Rombauer, but not all that far ahead going forward.
Well, I would, I would rank him way ahead of Rombauer, just in my thoughts. And one thing I'll say about that trip, Pete, is a lot of I'm a believer that when the gate opens, even if you take a slight bump, and I think what excessive quality had was more than a slight bump. I think that was a steady gate. There was serious contact there, but I understand that, and I've had many conversations with jockeys that basically have backed this up. That you can, when the gates open, the horses are, there's a loud bell goes off and there's a lot of yelling and screaming and horses are all juiced up a little bit for those first few strides. And you can't, I don't think it takes that much from a horse's performance, what happens in those first few strides, other than, getting sideswiped, getting a body blow. But if you'll look at the replay of the Derby, after that happens, as the horses are going down the stretch for the first time, Saez realizes that he has two options. He has the same option as Midnight Bourbon had, to be passive at that point and be 10th, 12th, whatever, early in the early going. And probably you're married to that spot until you're well onto the backside. Or his other option was to use a little horse and try to get position. And he chose the second option. And he actually moves his hands and asks the horse to get into the race. The first time down the stretch, he passes at least half a dozen, excessive quality passes at least a half a dozen horses. And that little move inside the race, at that point in the race, to me, takes some of his finish away.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only reason he hung.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right to me. You're going to get me saying this name wrong too. Essential quality. Back to Rombauer for a second, because there were a couple other things I just wanted to button up on him. One, I want to give props by name: Diane and John Fradkin, the breeder owners there. And this, one of the things, I'll admit it, one of the things that put me a little bit off. I would have liked Rombauer in the Derby. One of the things that did put me just a little bit off, I mean, I wrote nice things about him, but then I didn't ultimately shortlist him in my At the Races piece. But one of the idea, and we joke about this all the time, the idea how typically the owner picked spot as opposed to the trainer picked spot, typically it's the wrong spot. However, what I realized after this race that I'll keep with me is I can't remember an owner picked spot besides this one where it was the owner picking the more conservative of the two options. And with that in mind, and look, obviously they went to the right place. It all worked out. I'm not just making an apology here, but I did see some criticism of Michael McCarthy for wanting to run in the Derby. The way the Derby flowed, I don't think Rombauer would have won. It really seemed that was a forward favoring flow for sure. But there are alternate realities, strands in the multiverse where Rombauer might have won the Derby too, with the right kind of race flow in there. If one of Midnight Bourbon or Rock Your World breaks cleanly, I feel like it's a different deal. So look, it worked out. I don't want to totally spend too much time relitigating it, but I mean the horse was very, very good, and I'm happy for both for every facet of connections. But I don't think it's as easy as, oh, Michael McCarthy was wrong. This was, and Mr. Fradkin was right. I just think it's interesting. Let me ask you, when you have seen these owner picked spots in the past, am I correct that it's pretty rare that the theoretically less ambitious spot would be the one where the owner wanted to go?
Yeah, and generally, the trainers are going to pick out better spots than the owners, and the owner's going to always be overreaching,
right?
In almost every case. I really, that's one of the things I liked about Mr. Franken. He described himself as a horse player, and he got into the business as a horse player. And, I believe that, because I think, he showed me some sharpness there. He had he passed a 20 horse field of, bumper cars. But he had a free roll into the Preakness from winning the El Camino Real.
That's right.
And he, so that makes perfect sense. Probably the timing, might have been better for the horse. Obviously, it worked out. I mean, they had confidence that they could train the horse into his best race over that length of time, and he was going to run in a short field. He probably, couldn't dream that it would come up as favorable as it did, with only 2 or 3 real contenders I would classify in there. So, whatever his reasons were, he picked the perfect spot. I mean, he made the right call. Would he have won the Derby? I can't say no. I don't know. I don't think we can, we're gonna plot that all out today. But I kudos to the guy. I say the guy's probably a good handicapper.
Yeah, it certainly worked out brilliantly. And again, it was a result I felt was just really beneficial to racing. I don't think a Medina Spirit win would have been what we needed to throw more gasoline on the fire of that story. So
and Pete, to jump back in, you can never shut me up on this.
No, please.
Once we get started, but I watched some of the NBC coverage, and I was horrified when I loved it when NBC basically, to me, they were telling the truth. They were calling racing out for blatant things that we do wrong. But one of the things that really bothered me is my home state, the Kentucky Racing Commission, when asked for information regarding the status of the split sample, I believe, wouldn't give the information to NBC Sports, and tells them if they want it, they can file a freedom of information request. What in the world are, how we get transparency thrown around like pennies in racing, and then in the reality of it is, this is what is going on. This is the truth of it, is you won't even give out basic information. So I don't know the whole, if NBC, if Mike Tirico is framing it correctly or not, but when that goes out, that is so harmful. That's so damaging to go out to a nationwide audience. And it's just a little example of the way we operate in racing, and the crazy things we do to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Well, let's talk about the Baffert situation a little bit. As a horse player, I know you've long been a believer in barns and short-term fluctuations of form, whether positive or negative. There's amazing stuff in your book, Betting with an Edge, about some of the reasons why a barn may get hot and a barn may get cold that have absolutely nothing to do with medication. Did you find it notable that the Baffert horses underperformed all weekend under the bright lights, the scrutiny that was going on at Pimlico, or was that well within just normal variance for you?
I was slightly underperformed for me, but I thought and this is in no way a reflection of it. This is probably the wrong thing to say in this conversation, but I thought, to be honest, that the Chad Brown horses underperformed at Pimlico this weekend. So, that probably is totally unrelated. So, I don't know that I can make my guilty, not guilty opinions on, how their horses performed. I know there was the bright lights were on this weekend, but I think trainers running hot and cold is such a hard thing to nail down that I can't rely totally on that.
You hadn't downgraded the Baffert runners coming into the Preakness.
Slightly.
Okay, that's interesting. So that's I mean, I'll just let those words speak for themselves. I suppose. Let's speak about it more. Let's take a step back and more from a horse player advocate point of view than strictly speaking a gambler. What were your emotions last week as the scandal unfolded?
Well, it's terrible. This is how I make my living. I choose to make my living in thoroughbred racing, and I have full time for the last 20 years. And I've been known, as a horse guy, in quotes, for my whole life. When something like that happens, I'm sure it's the same way with you. I get texts from relatives, from friends. My wife even gets contacts, but because we're the horse people in our little crowd, and so it's then upon me to defend the sport I love to the outside world, and it's no fun, and I'm not breaking any news to you, but so I resent it, and it infuriates me that racing chooses to kick this can down the road for 40 years. It infuriates me.
That's interesting. You feel like it goes back that far in terms of what specifically?
Well, it goes back to I think the rules started to become muddled after Dancer's Image in 1968. I think, as you move on, on a timeline from there, the medication rules become harder and harder to stay on top of if you're a trainer. They become less and less reasonable because they don't match up from state to state. Some of it becomes political, and it's just maddening that racing as an industry regarding medication rules can't get its act together over my lifetime. That's what's maddening is, it's not like it's been ignored. I mean, we've had studies after study, we've had committees, we've had, there's 37 racing jurisdictions, I think, in the U.S. And a big chunk of those racing jurisdictions have had their own studies, their own discussions, their own infighting about it. And just the racing's habitual lack of coordination, cooperation has put us in the mess we're in, where we're basically on national TV with even I think the NBC announcers were trying to protect us and put a good face on it to some degree, and you couldn't do it.
Well, it's hard, especially with Baffert being at the center of it, a guy who correctly declared himself to be the face of the sport in many ways. When the people who were coming out of the woodwork to ask you questions because you're the racing guy asked specifically about Baffert and if the Lance Armstrong comparisons, which I've made myself, were accurate, what did you say?
Well, I try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't sound like it when I start talking wagering security, but I gave those people the benefit of the doubt for a couple of decades before I got to this point. But I don't rant to my friends, to that I know this or I know that. I mean, how can you not have suspicions when all this, evidence of some sort lines up and it all seems to be on one side? So if I had to wager on the outcome of this, you can figure out which side I would wager on. But I don't want to to make someone guilty before they've had their day in court. But my the fault I find is as much with the way racing lays this out. In my eyes, it lays out the rules. They encourage some of this behavior by the slaps on the wrist and by the ineffective oversight that they provide.
One problem that I have, and one thing that just causes a lot of cognitive dissonance for me, is if we know one thing about sophisticated cheating from other sports, it's that they don't fail tests. Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, Lance Armstrong, what do they all have in common? They never failed. Never got pinned for a drug test, though. One of Lance's failures did have an excuse oddly similar to the one that came out in this instance, but we'll leave that alone for the moment. But that's one thing that I think is just very weird, is that, if there is stuff, there may be a relationship, though, between what you're saying about the different rules and the inconsistency of testing with Baffert and others. I mean, that's the thing, is somebody asked me the other day, like, oh, so if you look at horse trainers with medication positives, is Baffert like far and above the number one offender? And I looked into it. My gut was, no, there's people who have more than him. And I looked into it, and that wasn't in fact the case. And it makes it very hard. It makes it very hard to explain, especially to those people from the outside looking in at the sport. But I can't sit here and be an industry apologist about this stuff. But and then again, two conflicting thoughts in the mind at the same time. I also can't help but see some hypocrisy and look, I don't want to call people out because they're breaking ranks by making public comments about the situation in a way that's critical of Baffert and the offenses here. But it's not without irony when some of the only people speaking up are using trainers who are among those on that list that I said that have more medication positives than Baffert does. So what are we as horse players supposed to do, Mike?
Yeah, good question, Pete. What you were asking about what people, how I explain things to people, and one of the things that I've had discussions with in the past, when some of these things have come up, like the gamine issue in Arkansas, is the cover-ups that have gone on in racing regarding some of this. Like, to me, it's unforgivable. The California Racing Board, I don't know, they changed the name of that enough times where I'm not sure what they're going by these days. If I had the record they had, I would change it more often. But the going back to some of the rulings that they have made regarding Baffert, it's criminal. How as a horse player are we supposed to be good with that? It offends me and I think that if you're asking to how we get to where we are today, that's a good example. It's you're above the law, you're above the regulations, and we'll even go back and rewrite the regulations to give you the pass.
Yeah, that's unfortunately a very fair criticism, and the best practices are just not anywhere near where they need to be. The idea that unless this had been leaked, we still wouldn't know about it, right? We wouldn't even know about it till this magical date in the future when the split sample comes out, and then we'd have been whatever, maybe even after the Belmont, and then learning that we have a new Kentucky Derby winner. Like, it's Mickey Mouse. I mean, we're a major sport, and this the line I've been using is it makes us look somewhere on a podium of sports south of boxing in terms of the way that we conduct our business.
I've said for years we're a grade 1 gambling game with a Mickey Mouse regulation.
And I think it's hard to argue. People tell me, "Oh, but the technology, like that's just how long it takes. What are we supposed to do?" What you're supposed to do is invest in a better practice where it doesn't take that freaking long to get a test result for your signature event.
That's true. And one thing, I'll hit again here is we can all see how bad these medication rules are, and if everyone takes the time to read Pat Cummins' report, you'll see that the wagering problems match up entirely with these medication problems.
I sure hope that the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act can make a difference here. I mean, I know you've dealt with some of these political organizations at times. I mean, be honest. What do you think the chances are that HISA can make a difference in some of these matters?
Well, Pete, personally, I'm going to do my best. I don't know, what that will entail exactly, but I'm going to try to contact some of the people on this commission and present my case of the way I see it, and hopefully, do a little educating. I'm part of a steering committee with the Thoroughbred Ideal Foundation. I'm sure we're going to be having discussions about that. Well, and when it comes to that, I will go along with whatever we decide as a committee. I'll give you the pros and cons. The pros would be that you have fewer people to convince, fewer people to convince, instead of having to convince every racing commissioner from 37 jurisdictions. Well, Florida chooses not to have a racing commission, so they helped us a little there.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that's another podcast. You have fewer people to convince that of the things that are wrong with racing, and fewer people to explain our ideas of what could possibly be the solutions and the right paths to go down. So that's got to be
that's an insane improvement, right?
Yes,
I mean, that's a whole different ball game kind of improvement.
That's a big positive. And I'm sure there are some well-meaning people. I'm not, I've read the list of the people on the commission. I'm sure there are some very smart, well-meaning people on that list. I also saw, several people that are veteran, racing people that, I would just say that, hopefully, they will have more movement in this position than they had in their previous position, would be the hopeful way to say it. The cons of it are that big racing corporations, we can, the place with the spires and
I like the place with the spires. That's forever after what that's going to be called. Our friends at Churchill Downs.
There's another big company that I don't have a cute little nickname for, but they're, whether we like it or not, whether we want to admit it or not, they have tremendous influence over everything that goes on in racing. And, I hope I'm proven wrong, but until I'm proven wrong, I will assume even over a federal oversight authority, because I'm a student of past performances. So hopefully, the influence of the Spires will be less than it has been in other segments of racing and in other areas of racing. Hopefully, it won't be like the way that the Spires has treated the Horsemen of Illinois. I'll pee on your leg and tell you it's raining. But that's yet to be determined. A lot of it, Pete, is going to depend on these individuals on this commission. They are going to have the opportunity to clean up a sport and improve a sport that is done properly, could have a very positive economic impact on many states. There's a big win in this if these people dedicate themselves to keeping their eye on the ball, the people on the commission, to playing hardball with these large entities that are trying to act in their self-interest and in the self-interest of their shareholders. They're, the place with the Spires, it's bound by law, its corporate charter. Its number one priority is its shareholders, not the good of racing. So the people on this commission need to understand that and keep that in mind as they address the issues.
It's an important lesson for sure. All right, I want to get back to some hardcore racing handicapping talk while I have you.
You keep saying that.
I know, and then we keep going back in the weeds. 10 minutes. Can I bother you for 10 more minutes?
You can do whatever you want, Pete.
All right, let's go back to the Preakness and let's talk about. Actually, let's say it this way. I have you on, and we have a race day we're talking about that, to my mind, had an important track bias. You know more about track bias than pretty much any human being alive, and we're 15 minutes in, and I haven't asked you about it. I don't want to be accused of any host fails here, Mike. Do you agree that there was a track bias at Pimlico over the weekend?
Absolutely. Friday, I thought, well, first of all, I thought that the turf course was completely fair, in my opinion. I thought you could be in any lane that you wanted, and you could lead wire to wire. You could come from behind. Very fair turf course. The main track, I thought on Friday, I heard some people saying speed. In my notes, I entered it as a rail bias, as a significant rail bias. On Saturday, I thought that was less, and I thought it was not as pronounced, the bias. I thought it was less of a bias, and basically the same type bias, just leaning inside on the main track.
I thought it was curious. I don't know, with jockeys, you never know, but it seemed like Medina Spirit in the Preakness was deliberately being kept off the rail, which I thought was bizarre. I don't know that it mattered. He felt like there weren't too many scenarios where he was going to finish ahead of Midnight Bourbon to me after the fact. But were you surprised by that? Do you upgrade him at all for not taking advantage of that? What are you curious to get your thoughts about Medina Spirit, John Velasquez, and track bias, and maybe a word on what you expect from Medina Spirit going forward?
Yeah, I didn't understand that. I think the concept of being, at least too wide, like in the first turn, the idea, which I kind of agree with, I didn't fault the first turn positioning, but I think the idea is to discourage Midnight Bourbon from engaging you. If you're you come up and engage me, you're going to have to do it in the 3.5 path.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that encourages Midnight Bourbon to take back. that encourages IRAD to, hey, Velasquez is basically saying back off. And you see that in a lot of races, that's a common maneuver. A lot of times, especially on a track that I would have to think all the jocks by the time of the Preakness, that it was common knowledge in the jocks room, hey, the rail is good. When you get on the backside, that's where I didn't understand. You seemed like you were in the 2.5 path, the best I could tell. I was actually at a party watching on NBC at that point, but it looked like the 2.5 path to me.
I agree.
And I don't really understand that, because at that point, you've already done your back off move. IRAD on Midnight Bourbon has probably relegated himself to, I'm just going to press this pace, and there's no reason to turn the heat up until we get, to the 3/8 pole or further, which is what I think he would have done. And so I don't understand, if you're Johnny V, why don't you drop over and get the good part of the track at that point? That feels like a mistake to me. I know horses, if you're trying to keep them relaxed, jocks have told me, it's much better to keep them a path or two off the rail, because they're used to, in their works, as soon as you drop them to the rail, they know it's go time. So that's a signal to them. That's a cue. And, so try not to criticize riders unless I have a real, unless I'm positive. So I don't have a huge problem with it, but, given the circumstances and given the bias, I would have thought you would have come back to the rail sooner. The horse I think that impacted the most was Midnight Bourbon, because I think that puts you in a really tough spot when, now you're in the 3.5 path, and you're pressing a legitimate horse who's probably, your main contender in the race, and you're having to give him ground all the way around there. And that Midnight Bourbon went by Medina Spirit and was best of the speed, to me is a positive. It's a notch in his cap. He was my pick in the race, and I thought he ran very well.
It's a big move up for sure. And I think you're outlining it exactly right. So he ends up chasing a good horse wide, making a move into the teeth of a hot pace that came apart enough for a deeper closer with a great ride in Rombauer to get it done. I mean, just thinking about it now, I feel like, am I right in saying, moving forward, in terms of your ability figures, you'll have Midnight Bourbon every bit as high as, if not higher than Rombauer?
Well, what was the margin of victory there? Three lengths or something?
3.5.
3.5.
Was it enough to make that up?
Probably not quite enough, but in the neighborhood anyway. Midnight Bourbon is, he's a hard knocking horse. He's really, he's never done anything really wrong. He, even when he takes a bad trip, he still shows up. And he's a tiz now out of a Malibu Moon mare. He has a right to be a kind of a late developing horse that just keeps coming. So, he's a very nice animal. I'm impressed with him, and Asmussen, as usual, just a genius of a horseman who, just keeps these horses improving, gets lots of races out of them. A guy that, if you can, guy that's getting ready to have won more races than anybody in the history of racing, and yet is underrated. It's hard to imagine, but what a trainer this guy is. But in those hands, Midnight Bourbon's a horse that can keep going forward.
Be interesting to see where they target him. I guess his name, his hat, the hat potentially in the ring for the Belmont as well, maybe. But what a race this Belmont Stakes could be. I do want to get a word on the disappointment of the race, who you and I were both against going in, Concert Tour. I thought he got really washy, like loads of kidney sweat before the race. I didn't like him anyway, and before the race I texted like, stay the heck away from this horse to a number of people. He got no kind of.
I was not on that group text, by the way.
He got no kind of trip. I mean, another, like, I'm not sure what the hell the plan was there, but I mean, it obviously went so wrong that, I mean, the horse just wasn't himself. I'm just curious. At this point, he sure feels like much more hype than reality. And I didn't understand going into the race how apparently there were still those in the Baffert camp saying he was the better horse than Medina Spirit. There was nothing on paper to suggest that was true. And then after the race, I don't know what to make of him at all. And I have no idea what was going on in the irons there.
Yeah, on paper he looked like a pitch, and the way the track was playing, the only possible shot he had to hit the board for me was if he cleared. And I was listening with interest when the interviews were done with the jocks, and Mike Smith was saying, play the brake, and Bob says play the brake, and Johnny V sounded had a little more intention, so that helped with the pitch of Concert Tour. Just, not that I was totally sure. What bothered me is when a trainer at Baffert's level enters a horse when you're scratching your head, exactly what the plan is. Sometimes that's a dangerous horse, because those guys, they don't get where they are putting horses in no hope spots. So that bothered me a little, but that's the great thing about a track bias is it's almost like you have two reasons to pitch Concert Tour. Is you don't like him on paper, and unless he gets the perfect scenario, the bias is probably going to wipe him out anyway.
It's a good point. You mentioned about Chad Brown underperforming. Obviously, there were the two in the Preakness, but maybe you're also referring to the dinner party. Though, to be fair, I did feel like Sacred Life had. You want to talk about a head scratching ride for me? I just thought he had no kind of chance from where he was. The victory in the end goes to Some Like It Hot Brown, who, speaking of trainers who win a lot of races, Mike Maker getting the job done there. I was just curious what you thought about the specifically Sacred Life, if you think I might be overrating the trouble he had there, and if there's anything you saw in the dinner party that you'd take forward with you to the next time these horses appear in a big turf race.
Well, I'll have a hard time making that race a total pitch for Sacred Life. He did not have a good trip. I agree with that. Like I said earlier, I didn't think paths mattered a lot on that turf course. But even if they didn't, Sacred Life did not get a good trip. He never got in a comfortable spot. He was never really able to gather himself and find a good, comfortable stride where, he could get in a rhythm. To me, he was always in among horses and always felt a little out of position to me in the race. So, I guess I'm saying a little bit of both, but just didn't feel like Sacred Life ran up to his PPs. I didn't think this was that deep a field for the level. And in my eyes, I really needed him to be at least, say, it just looked like the 1 and the 5, and then, either him or Some Like Hot Brown. And, I played some tricks with them 1-2, and was sure he was, once he got swung to the extreme outside, that he would run by and pick up second for me. So a little disappointed, more from a horse perspective than going forward than a betting perspective. It just felt like he should have been able to finish a little better than he did.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So nobody that you're really dying to bet out of the dinner party, and it is a big race, but it's also wedged 2 weeks after the Grade 1 at stuff at Churchill, and there's a logic that you wouldn't necessarily get the cream of the crop in the dinner party.
Right.
All right, good stuff, Mike. I'm going to let you get on with your day, but really appreciate you sharing all your thoughts and looking forward to talking to you again very, very soon. Thank you for taking time to join us. JK will be back soon. We'll thank him in absentia. We're going to be back real soon, but a couple other thank yous, including to producer Craig, who's helping get this video out there in the universe, and to our founding partners, Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation, trfinc.org/players. We still have some bottles of the whiskey. The new In the Money whiskey is out there in the world and waiting for your donation to get that as a gift. They've been selling pretty quick. Oh, I accidentally lied the other day. I said I was going to be sending out the first batch, I think last week. It didn't happen. There was a label error. You have to get the labels printed again. So it's going to be a couple more weeks. But the good news is that means you can get one really soon if you make your donation, trfinc.org/players. Thanks also to our friends at 10 Strike Racing. Thanks most of all, though, to all of you, the listeners, the viewers, for making these shows so much fun to do. That's going to do it. This show's been a production of In the Money Media. Our business manager is Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.